Excellent. We're rolling. Ian, thank you for being here. It's really, really appreciated. Welcome to episode 2 of the Authenticity Hour, everyone. Thank you for stopping by. This will be uploaded on YouTube, Spotify, any place we can actually put it, and you'll probably find lots of clips of it on LinkedIn and everywhere else, so look out for that. Ian, me and you have had some really nice conversations in here, just about everything to do with emotional intelligence, leadership, even what you do in osteopathy. So I want to put the floor over to you to introduce yourself and what you do, because until I'd met you, I didn't actually know half of what you did, and how important it was. And then as soon as you started telling me, I was like, oh wow, why do I not know more about this? So yeah, please tell us what you do, my man.
Well, I think the first thing to say is, I work as an osteopath, and I've done that for 25 years or so. And basically, an osteopath fits into the ballpark of the physiotherapist, chiropractor, sort of the manual therapy field.
Yeah, because that's where my brain first went when you told me osteopathy. And so it's almost a combination of all of them.
Kind of, although I'm very aware personally as an osteopath that I will be referring to different people if I feel so.
Absolutely, because everyone has their specialties.
Absolutely. And for me, though, my little speciality quickly began to go down the path of the mix of not just the physical. So I'm very much into the neuromuscular skeletal parts of the body as they function together.
Yep.
And where there's a blockage, where there's a breakdown in the healing process, it's usually to do with one of those initially, those focus. So either there's a muscle problem, someone's hurt themselves, or there's a nerve blockage, or, various other kind of combinations of those that cause ill health. But it quickly became apparent to me, working at the Bristol Cancer Help Centre many years ago now, that there was an emotional and a mind component that figured hugely in a person's health. And I'll never forget reading a book by Candice Pert called Molecules of Emotion.
Put that on the list, everyone.
It's quite an old book, and it might be hard to track, but that illustrates how certain keys in the body get switched on or off depending on what emotional state we're in. So if somebody has a cancer, and you do hear of people being spontaneously healed from such sort of processes, but certainly we had people come to us. We were an alternative, complementary approach to cancer care in terms of the oncology, as alternative to oncology.
Yeah.
But what we were looking at was how could we help people, because they'd come to see us and their first comment might be, what's going on for you? They say, well, I'm dying of cancer. And our shift was to try and say, well, let's turn that around. Let's reframe that and say, well, you're living with cancer. And then we start to bring in new mindsets around that. And we'd look at the emotional effect that it had on the body. And people's stories would be quite phenomenal. And you could see how that might have been a product. And I started to think, well, if that's the case, then that's surely going to be implied with some of the work I've got.
Yep.
So people coming in with really tight shoulders, I'd inquire of their sort of circumstances and history. There was no evident problem. There's no trauma. But they were highly stressed at work. They were moving house. And they were falling out with their partner, and
it's all going on, and that weight is all on their shoulders, physically and metaphorically.
Well, yeah, you'd have somebody come into the office, and they'd use language like, "Oh, that person in the office is a total pain in the neck," and
it's just Freudian slips everywhere, really.
And so what I'd remind them. I'd go back and say, "So, what is your problem? Did you say you have a neck problem?"
You've got a pain in the neck problem.
Let's see if the pain in your neck has got something to do with the stress of you managing the person you say is a pain in the neck, and that's exactly how my process in this whole world. I began to realise there was a monumental connection. There's this great synergy of healing of the body that isn't just physical; it's emotional, and it's mental.
Yeah, and that's what I love about that concept. And as soon as you start telling me about it, quite a while ago now, I just thought back to the amount of times that I'd probably worked myself into sickness. It happened not long ago. Literally, I put myself out of commission for like 3 days because I just pushed it way too far over the line, and I could tell my body was suffering for it. But I was just like, deadlines. And then now I'm laid up for 3 days, or I gave myself back pain. And I'm like, how many times has this happened to everyone? I'm sure many people might have a bit of a light switch moment and gone, how much this is connected with what's actually going on, and why is this not more of a mainstream practice in like GPs and stuff like that to actually work out the root causes of everything. And it's just, I start to think about how bizarre it is that it's not already a thing, at least in the mainstream offerings.
Indeed. And I find myself continually saying to my clients, my patients, are you aware of these other connections that might be related to the cause of your pain?
Yeah, because you're always subconsciously, aren't you? It's just whether you are aware
of it or not. And one of the things that I've recently, I was with a patient recently, and I said, did you recognize when your body said no?
Yeah.
You don't have to do this, stop. And they said, of course not, they weren't aware. So I might refer to, there's a brilliant GP stroke psychologist, I guess you could say, called Gabor Mate.
Yeah.
Another one for somebody to research on. Gabor Mate.
List everyone.
And that book is called When the Body Says No.
Yeah.
And it's all about learning how the body will give us clues. One of the strange things I might say to a client is, pain is your friend.
Pain is an indicator.
Yeah, but it's telling you something. Look, hey, maybe don't do this. Or maybe get some help for this. So pain is your friend, rather than what we do is just reach for the painkillers, don't we?
Yep. And we do that in life a lot with other things. How can we ignore this problem or run away from it instead of addressing it?
Let's fuel with alcohol.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's try and find an escape.
Whatever your vice is, maybe it's Greg's Donuts for me. So, it's just whatever brings that into play.
Eating is another way of self-soothing. Because we don't recognise that we're struggling with stressful circumstances that make us feel upset.
Yes.
And they make us feel fearful, they make us feel anxious, all these emotional terms that we use.
Yeah.
And what we try to do is to ignore them by doing whatever that habit is. And my job is to come along and very, very gently.
Yeah, because it has to happen one step at a time, doesn't it?
Well, the word is compassion.
Yeah.
It's me extending compassion to somebody who's getting stuck like that, but also it's helping them to be compassionate for themselves, because all of this field is linked up with low self-esteem, and and that varies. We're not always in that space of difficulty.
Yep.
There are ups and lows, but when we get low and our self-esteem is really hitting the bottom, somebody needs to be able to come along and say, gently, forgive yourself, bring some compassion to yourself. There is a way out.
Yeah. And I think that has a lot to do with awareness and emotional intelligence, which we all have various levels. And that's why we have the lovely prop in the middle here, the emotional intelligence in the workplace is what we'll touch on a lot. But we were talking about it before the show started, actually, so you guys missed a bit of a nice segment, and it was mostly about how the differences between EQ and IQ. So before I start riffing on that, then, in your definition, what would you class as emotional intelligence?
Well, emotional intelligence starts with recognizing it's about emotions. And there's two ways you can look at emotions. First of all, from a biological point of view, we experience emotions in the brain, in a space in the brain called the limbic system. So when we take in information, we take in information through two little sensors either side of the head here called the amygdala, and that goes to the brain stem, goes through the limbic system, and if we get an emotional charge from what we're inputting, that's where it'll get processed. Our intelligence quota is something that's fixed. We're born with that, and we do a lot of our reasoning with our intellectual ability at the front part of the brain, the cortex. So emotional intelligence is the ability to reason out what's going on for our emotions. It's to be able to become aware that we've got some, and we might be experiencing them in our heads, but to be really honest, the way that I view it as an osteopath is we experience also a ton of emotion in the body.
Yep.
So I would ask a patient, so, you're speaking about being fearful. So where do you experience fear in your body? Just so that this is a part of the awareness thing.
You'll feel it in a certain area, won't you? So your gut.
They might, but it's different for everybody. So somebody you say, "Well, I feel it in my throat." When I'm afraid, I feel
back
it here.
of the neck, yeah.
Or when do you feel angry? So notice where in the body do you feel anger? And it's like on your jaw. You might find it in the jaw here, or you feel your hands shape up.
Yep.
In like that, you tense your body.
Yep.
So the emotional awareness can start there. So we all can do that right now.
Physical signifiers.
Yeah, I mean, we could even do a thing right here and now and say, where everybody is sitting and watching this, just be aware of what is going on in your body right now. Just be aware of your sitting, just feeling where you're resting on the chair, the standing, whatever you're listening to this podcast.
Yeah. Because it's surprising where you won't notice it. Because let's say if you I know I have a habit of curling my toes first. Right. I won't recognise it because I can't see it.
Yeah.
But I won't notice I'm doing it because I'm so used to it.
No, exactly.
But if you do it in your hands, for instance, you'll be able to see that more physically. Yeah. But stopping and taking that moment is extremely important.
Well, I'm going to drop in my body right now. And say, I'm still feeling slightly nervous about being here.
Absolutely.
I can feel it in my body.
Yeah.
And by just naming it, I can kind of breathe. And I can just let the nervous feelings in my body, which are affecting my body, I can let go of it.
Yeah.
And we can do that anytime we're in an office situation. So going back to the workplace thing, if you're with a colleague in a workplace and you feel something not quite right, the first thing I would go is check in with your body and say, what am I feeling in my body?
Yeah.
Because it might be an emotion that I can't make sense of yet.
Yeah, I've noticed talking to different people how, for me, I feel like I can conceptualize my emotions quite quickly in words, whereas others take a lot more time to process that. And one of the things I also notice is some people are really good with emotional intelligence outwardly, so they'll be able to notice situations in people and how that's making others feel, but when it comes to the inward version of that, they'll probably ignore themselves altogether. And I think that's probably part of whatever process of that person is built up over time. So they're probably if you tend to be a people pleaser or a perfectionist, it depends on how you've kind of built up over time and your things, really. So that also plays a massive part as well.
Well, it's also indicative of sometimes people going through trauma.
Yes.
And when you've had trauma in your childhood or through other aspects of your life, you end up not realizing that the stress response you had was not just fight or flight, because you could neither fight or flee, you froze.
Yep.
And that kind of trauma can have a deep impact on that limbic system.
Yep.
Also, I've heard of people who've had actual, sort of tumours, maybe even benign tumours in the brain that have actually impacted the limbic system. And when that tumour's been removed, there's been a bit of damage to that limbic system. They can't make sense of their emotions. And so there's a real powerful need for us to recognise what's going on for us. And if we have got blockages and so on, we can seek out a bit of help for that.
Yeah. And I suppose that then, especially for business owners, for instance, I think there's a subtle nuance of when you're hiring or putting together systems and teams as to can you gauge these subtle things about people and how they'll fit together in an office or even a remote environment in the hiring process. Part of me thinks it's not even possible in those 2, maybe 3 interviews you'd have with someone to figure out where they could really slot into not only just your work ecosystem but your emotional ecosystem you have set up.
Right.
So you could have a really nice kind of forward-facing workflow and kind of environment and culture, but someone who's maybe had a trauma response of previous bad corporate environments has that defense mechanism ready to go, and that can get triggered at even the slightest thing and then cause conflicts within a team. Because I know that's personally been some of my experience, how I've just not gelled with anything restrictive at all. So now I try and stay away from structure as much as possible, and especially now I'm kind of in charge of my own life, and sometimes with others' tasks, I go, okay, let's freestyle this, and sometimes it needs to add a little bit more structure to things. So that I'm interested to hear your thoughts on like the hiring process as well, in regards to getting the right person in the right emotional state.
Sure. Well, it's a big area, and I think what I need to do at the moment is introduce the fact that alongside my osteopathy, I also work as a coach and a consultant into this area of emotional intelligence. And I've worked with a number of companies, individuals, entrepreneurs, and small businesses to help with this very, very subject. And I've qualified myself in a number of skills, and
man of many talents.
I've done coaching qualifications, and I've done various psychological qualifications to get up to speed on that, so that I am I can present a real scientifically kind of justifiable process for people.
Absolutely.
And there's lots of things out there that I went and had a look in real depth to, and I came up with two. To me, the two gold standard profiling tools that can be used in business. One is DISC, and it's the Wiley version of the DISC profiling thing. That's been around. I mean, Marston introduced that back in the 1920s or something, and it's been refined right the way through. He identified 4 basic emotional components that we can but we can exhibit in the workplace. And what you're referring to is, can a leader or a manager who is recruiting, say, in that process, begin to have enough of an expanded view of emotional intelligence in their own head to be able to assess somewhere where that client might be, and there are profiling that sometimes people do. They maybe use a DISC profile, because we all show up with different roles in work, and we show up with different behaviours, and that's none more been demonstrated than in this COVID thing. If you're on Zoom and you're the CEO speaking to camera on to your staff, and then suddenly your son runs in the room, you've suddenly gone from my CEO hat on to my father hat on to deal with this thing, and you start to realize we do show up with these different roles on, and sometimes the importance of understanding those roles is, so for example, if I have a tech person, they may be in the accounting department, or they might be in the SaaS field working on computer coding or something like that. It's highly likely that they have a certain behaviour that is completely opposite of the salesperson who's all enthusiastic, wants everybody jumping around and enthusiastically supporting their point of view. And where you don't get a sort of a match there, and people start to go, oh dear, I'm going to the quieter chap, the accountant or the computer coding guy goes, oh, I'm going to stay away from that guy when he's in the kitchen. That's where these things creep in.
People try and gravitate to their tribe, don't they, and then isolate themselves from others sometimes.
And so a leader and a manager can actually acquire some brilliant emotional intelligence skills to be able to help train their team. Because one of the key things I work with, one of the things I've done is building teams. And in the workplace, every one of us, if you're a business person listening to this, the one major quality to me that undergirds solid teamwork is the word trust.
Massive.
And when you start to see trust diminish, when you start to see trust being broken down because of some of these misunderstandings that might be occurring, my role is to go in there and to analyze those situations, because we want to establish trust as the most important ingredient for team building.
And I don't envy that task, because building trust that has been broken down at some point is even, I'd say, probably harder than even establishing it in the first place. So it's sometimes. So that's quite an undertaking in itself. that's one of the things we focus on heavily. I mean, like, our whole thing is based around authenticity and trust. Like, just
your team,
yeah,
and
I try and share every single process. And I mean, the lovely guy manning our cameras and tech today, James behind the camera, he's been helping out massively, and he started a couple of days ago. But I made sure that the induction we went through was like, here's our goals, here's everything we want to achieve, here's exactly the clients we have, is the services they have. Even if James doesn't touch that for the time being, it's just a case of, I want everyone to be aligned. This is a goal that will be towards to be the best brand builders by 2030, or one of the best. That's where we want to be, and everyone has their skills for that, and everyone has a real engine to help push that forward. And I also want that to be open as well. So this is why this podcast exists. So I feel like others can get to know us before they've even had a chance to reach out, and that's what it's all about. And just getting rid of this veil of, I have to be perfect all the time business, and especially within agencies, they're terrible for it. They're like, we must be perfect outward clients, because big corporates will basically can you off for any kind of mistake, and we are perfect all the time, and it's stressful. It's absolutely strenuous. I'm just trying to break that down little by little, one client at a time.
Well, when these emotional triggers are noticeable, and they are triggers, we get triggered by all kinds of things, and it's got nothing to do with maybe, so if you and I were in a team together and I find myself being triggered, it may be nothing to do with you, but if I put it on you as something, your behavior, we then move into another area that we haven't discussed yet, and that is the fact we've got shadow areas in our lives. The whole concept that Carl Jung brought as a psychologist of the area of shadows. And shadow stuff is all about, well, it's being very cleverly defined recently as the me I cannot see.
Very nice. It rhymes. We love that.
But everybody else can.
Interesting.
So it's a kind of a behavior. So if I end up sort of judging you and pointing the finger at you, it's probably a criticism that has been levelled at me way long time ago in my past, and I'm afraid of displaying in my own life. And it's all about me, actually. It's not about you. And if somebody has got the emotional intelligence to start to pick those apart, they can actually very calmly and consistently bring the levels of conflict that might arise where triggering is occurring, and move it into a calm place, which I love the word authenticity, because it couldn't be a better match, this subject of emotional intelligence and the Authenticity podcast.
Plug.
Yeah, plug. Yeah, I like it very much, because everything about what you're trying to achieve, to build trust, to build an understanding of how we emotionally fit and how that fits with somebody else, is all about being authentic.
Yes. And it's literally the cornerstone of what we are built on here. And what a lot of people don't understand is that can be inward in your team, and that can also be projected outwardly. And I like the analogy you made earlier about CEO and the kind of son or daughter coming in the room, because I feel like those barriers need to be broken down immediately. Like, yes, I have to do certain things for my job, but also, look, here's the family, here's the dog, I feel like that should be a cornerstone of what we do. And obviously people are comfortable with certain levels of transparency, especially if they like to keep their work life and personal life separate. But I think transparency plays a massive role in it. I think that can be but inwardly amongst the team, but also outwardly in your content. So how much can you open up and talk about personal experiences? How much can you go, I'm not only a CEO, but I'm also a dad of 3, for instance. Like that can be huge just for just a little piece of humanization and authenticity to anything you do, both inwardly and outwardly.
Yeah, and part of the work I do is another profiling tool called ECR, the Emotional Capital Report, by Martin Newman. And what that does is it reveals 10 different emotional competencies. And we can do a test of a top leader, an elite leader, shall we say, or an executive leader. And we can measure a person across those competencies and see where out of those 10 they maybe need a little bit of a help with. Because the result of going through that process and getting a leader up to a high level of competency across all of those particular attributes, it reveals a person who is totally cool with being in the front of the camera speaking to his board or his accountants, and totally cool with his son popping in. Do you know what I mean? There's an authenticity.
Yeah.
He's not panicking. You can tell the person who's, oh dear, I'm all over the place because suddenly my role is being shifted and I wasn't
your
prepared for it.
corporate front has been flustered.
I've in my box and I can't be out my box.
Yeah.
So emotional intelligence is all about this agility and flexibility to flex into all these different areas. And my job, I see, is to clarify what needs to change, to help bring to awareness, where the, very similarly to the body. If somebody comes in with a broken body, I want to find out where the blockage is and help the body naturally heal. If I go into a company and we find that there's a blockage in this type of discussion, we're looking at some of the aspects of this discussion we're looking at here, then I want to fix that blockage. And suddenly the whole organism of a business, that symbiosis that you want to occur within a company,
what a word.
can be free to live. If you think of it like an ecosystem, like a forest, it just gets on and does its thing, all interrelating together. And that's how our businesses should be doing.
Exactly. And
I want to throw one more thing in on this because I think it's really incredible. In the first podcast, you had Alex on. I don't know Alex at all, but I really enjoyed listening to him. And he, about 17 minutes in...
Yep, exact time codes, people.
Okay. He started talking about working from home and working from in the office.
Yeah.
And he was talking about being in the office for a very long time. And that's fine if you get on with the people, and not so good if you don't get on with them. And that suddenly woke my thought, I can speak into that. And here's the thing. If you've got a team of programmers or a team of market designers or whatever you're looking at, and they don't quite get on... Well, let's say take one person and let's take two people trying to work together. If they don't get on like this, the output of 1 + 1 doesn't always equal 2, does it?
1.5, 1.7, if you're lucky.
Or 0, if they're not really getting on at all. Right? Now, what I'm about in this symbiosis, this free flowing healing in the emotional space that we're talking about here, the emotional intelligence space, I'm looking at 1 + 1 suddenly getting into such incredible flow with each other that the output's 5.
That's the maths I like.
Right?
Yeah.
And that's my vision too.
Yeah.
And you've got now organizations, some of you guys will have heard of SAP out in Germany.
Yep.
And they have actually researched this to the point where they say that there is a 200% ROI on investing in emotional intelligence in business. It hits. So in other words, this isn't just one of those soft subjects.
This isn't just if you've got the money to invest in it, maybe dabble.
No. This absolutely, looking at these issues, hits your bottom line.
100%. And it's one of the things where I've, even in our small beginnings as a team of 4 or 5, it's a case of how can we invest as much in people as possible in their successes and how they're feeling and what's going on in personal life. Like sometimes it can be tough for bosses to, or I don't even like that word to be fair, whoever's the leader, to just kind of reach out and have that connection with someone who's supposed to be an employee, because we have this preconceived notion of what a boss employee thing is supposed to be, whereas I wish we could just chuck that out of the thing. And I know you've talked to me before about creating a flat structure, like for instance, like yes, I'm kind of classed as a leader, but I'd rather be kind of sales and biz dev, and then my amazing team has, let's say, social media and content design and production and things like that. So well, to me, this subject, when you get into this subject, so if I get invited into a company to talk about EQ issues, emotional intelligence issues, and we start to look at, first of all, what needs to be kind of brought to bear, it can reveal some of the complications of structuring companies. And there's all kinds of different structures, from the hierarchical structure to a more flat structure to
nowadays I think people call it the teal structure, which is more of a self-managed, self-directed structure. And I'm working with companies as we speak. There's a company out in South Carolina that I'm working with who are wanting to push they wanted to bring the change from more of a hierarchical structure into a more self-managed kind of organizational process. And there are several people out there. I'm going to make a shout out to a guy called Frederick Laloux. He's a Belgian who's written a fantastic book back in 2014 called Reinventing Organizations. And there's a couple of other people that I can reference in the show notes at some other point later that
Absolutely.
I've come in contact since, who are pioneering in this. And I think business is all about, when we talk about moving forwards in business, and sure, we're at a cusp of a change coming to this, hopefully a close to the COVID restrictions. We're on the cusp of something new. It'd be brilliant to see innovation take place in business going forward.
Yeah.
And that, for me, means looking at these systems like an ecosystem that's much more symbiotic in its connection with one another, where you get people functioning in their skills and their roles to serve a common vision rather than to serve the CEO, and just to rush off home for their pay packet. They're actually finding themselves being incredibly more happy. They're getting more fulfillment in their jobs. They're serving something bigger. So it's this 1 + 1 = 5 idea.
Yeah.
That I'm seeing happen.
Yeah.
And again, that hits the bottom line, which if that's the case, everybody can share out the profits.
Yes.
So it's not just packing away into the shareholders or packing away into the CEO's bank account. In fact, Frederick Laloux has got this staggering thing. He said people ought to get paid for, in a completely different way. If a CEO is on, 250 grand, what does he need that particularly for? If he's only got himself, if he's a single guy, what does he do with that? Whereas there's other people in the company who've maybe got big families and they're just on the, maybe this guy is in his 50s or 60s and hasn't got that much to do with that. Whereas the person coming up through the company has got a big family and he needs the money then.
Yeah.
And so this takes us into a big area that's well discussed in other media channels. I have to say, there's a lot of it around there. But for me, it does start with understanding this quality of emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
And I just want to go back and define those a little bit more by saying the first step in getting that awareness is self-awareness.
Yeah, because I was going to say a lot of what we're talking about is really important, but I can hear the naysayers go, well, it's easier said than done, especially for awareness and improving those little things and noticing your triggers and things like that, because a lot of people would never have done that work yet before. Neither would it even be in their mind space of like recognizing that behavior. So, and no one case is the same, which is also another tough thing as well. So that's why you're such an expert. I mean, is there some generalized points where people can start to help with awareness or techniques to employ?
Yeah, I mean, simple stuff we've already said about is like come into your body. When you're in a work environment, you've got a conflict maybe going on, or you're just meeting people. Be aware enough of your body and what your emotions are saying, what your body is saying, and notice what your stress response is like, the fight, flight. If somebody triggers you, you're going to get a flush of blood in your face. Well, there are lots of ways. I think we've all heard of mindfulness techniques, and there's lots of skills that mindfulness can offer in helping us be more aware. But what we actually need to be is other aware, and I think that requires the skill of empathy. So actually, it involves more than just empathy. It involves listening.
Which can sometimes be a learned skill rather than one you're born with.
Well, do you know what? I'm going to go back and review this podcast.
Yeah.
just to see how much I was really listening to you.
And I'll do the same, yeah.
Okay. Because that's what we end up doing. We end up planning, and I'm sure I've done it already, we end up planning the next thing we want to say.
Well, especially on a medium like this, although it's the authenticity hour, right? We still realise that there's lights all around. There's 2 cameras here.
Yeah, exactly.
That bit is more human, I think. But yeah, I completely get what you mean.
So we're in an office situation. I want to be able to listen more to the other person than speak, and that way I can build up my empathy skills. And so that's another very important thing. Another major skill is to learn how to manage myself when I'm around you.
Yeah.
Right. So if there's I sense a bit of prickliness or difficulty or whatever, we're not in this flow state.
Yes.
Where 1 + 1 = 5. Okay.
E = MC squared. Yeah.
Yeah. If we're not doing that, if there's something kind of blocking there, then I'm going to commit, and I'm going to invite your listeners and watchers to commit to this little mantra. I need to manage myself in order to maintain our connection.
Interesting. Yeah.
All right.
Because that really puts the autonomy and the responsibility back to you. And I think there's always been a big discussion on accountability, and it's a big thing in entrepreneur books from all around. Is like extreme accountability. I think it's Jocko Willink that wrote that book, or however you say his last name. Apologies. But yeah, that is a concept that has been around for a long time, and some people avoid it. Some people embrace it too much and then overwork themselves, for instance, or put too much pressure on themselves. So there's a balance there you have to strike, because otherwise you either end up blaming yourself for everything or you shy away from anything. And that's why it's all about, as you say, management, but there's a balance to it.
And alongside that accountability, you mentioned the word accountability, is why not get a coach or a mentor, either in workplace environment or outside, like get a coach, consultant,
a fresh pair of eyes
to make yourself accountable to. So you say, look, I'm trying to build a relationship in this team, but I seem to be the one who's constantly messing things up. Can I talk to you and get some ideas? And then I can be accountable for some change in helping me manage myself in order for the success of the team.
That's big. And obviously a lot of people's first question, especially before I joined a space like Eagle Labs, for instance, which is our amazing venue, so thank you for that. But mentors and coaches are not as mainstream as they should be. No. Because even if you are in a career, or even if it's just day-to-day life, having someone to talk to and to help you keep accountable for the goals you do want to achieve, because it can be for anything and everything. I mean, a lot of it's business focused, but that it's huge. And ever since I have been like looking to coaches and mentors, and even having conversations like this, it does really help hold you accountable. And especially, let's say if it's more of a physical goal like losing weight, you can actually leverage social for that by as you're happy to take the step. Just tell everyone what your plans are. So I'm going to lose 30 pounds in let's say 2 months or whatever, like something like that.
Awesome.
That can really help hold you accountable. That's if you don't have anyone to rely on, or if you can only find paid coaches about, for instance. It should be something that everyone has, whether it's a coach, counsellor.
Absolutely. And I prefer, well, some people, it's always, of course, is sometimes the problem needs some psychotherapy or some counselling approach. Others you might sort of feel comfortable with a solution focused like that a coach would offer. And there are, it's one of the areas I work in, sort of high performance coaching. It's, my definition of that is I'm paid to push. So if you're trying to go somewhere, I'm going to push. That's completely different to an emotional issue that might need some deeper work on. But the idea, I mean, I'll make myself vulnerable here and say, in this growth industry of mine of coaching and consulting, I thought I knew enough about business to be able to make it on my own and to make my business successful. And I struggled, and I found myself really humiliated when I found that I didn't have any clue about marketing and sales. And I had to go back to the drawing board. Again, I thought, I can do this by myself. But no, what I did was found a coach.
Yeah.
And inside 2 weeks, all of the struggles that I was having to try and make ends meet and try to make things go was sort of finished by 2 weeks of coaching. I was back on track, back in the driving seat and away. And so, yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, I'll come down to the level as well and open up a little bit. Just in terms of ever since I started the business, obviously I'm sales and marketing focused anyway, so that part was filled in. But what wasn't filled in was the money side, the business structure side, and then managing yourself after the fact. So after I managed to, what I felt like gained my freedom in terms of, even though it's definitely not financial freedom in any stretch of the imagination, it's literally just like, right, I'm not in a 9 to 5 anymore. I'm finally free. No structure ever. So I then didn't continue to take care of myself in any way, and just could basically put everything into building a business, and then had a very big reluctance to ever reach out to anyone, because I know my weak point is maths. So I'm pretty sure I'm dyspraxic, but no one diagnosed it because they didn't really in my school. So when I see numbers on the spreadsheet, my brain just goes, and I don't like it. But I wouldn't ever admit that. And I try to fight it as much as humanly possible, but there's no need, because as soon as I've gone, that's not my strong suit, and that's fine. But it took me talking to someone to actually let that go and not try and fight that, no, I'm completely perfect. But at the same time, running with this thing of like, now I'm free of structure, it will never happen again. Whereas actually bringing that back into my life now is far better, and taking the advice from someone outwardly is also. So it just completely changes your state.
And let's go to head on to the pain point. Most people's pain point and the problem is paying for something like that.
Yes.
They don't want to pay. The coach is going to say, oh, that's going to be $5,000.
Yeah, because they can't see the value yet, can they?
Well, what they're doing is not evaluating what they're going to lose by not employing a coach. We need that kind of, and anybody who's listening to this, who's thinking of starting up, any of the entrepreneurs out there, and there must be many people who are maybe struggling on furlough, and they're thinking about starting up themselves in business. Once you've narrowed down to what it is that you want to be doing, what is your skill, what have you got to offer the world, and this touches on another thing I speak about, and that is the concept of wealth.
Yes.
All right. This concept of how we most of us think of wealth as money. But actually, I'm increasingly beginning to see that wealth is what you've got left when all the money's gone.
Yeah. And I love that sentiment. We talked about that earlier, didn't we? About obviously that aligns with the statement of like health is wealth, but it's also other things as well, like your knowledge and like amazing shows. I'm not sure. I don't actually know the name of the show, but there is a show where essentially they take a business owner, they dump them somewhere in America and say, here's $100, don't be broke or homeless, and then they still manage to build something up into an amazing place. I think someone got a restaurant evaluated to like just under $1 million in about 6 months or something like that, or it might be even a smaller time. And it's just because if you've done something once, you can do it again. So educating yourself is absolutely essential.
It puts the focus of wealth on your own value.
Yes.
So I'm going to say to anybody listening here who's thinking of starting up, I'm going to say, well, what is your value? What do you uniquely contribute to the world? And maybe because your emotional intelligence needs to be upgraded a bit, you're not believing in yourself enough to think you're worth it.
Yes.
Come on, let's do this. Let's get our irons in the fire. Let's find a coach if we need to. Let's borrow some money to get a coach who could help you move that wealth into the marketplace. Yeah. And then what you're going to need to do is to leverage that wealth. So if we think of value like a river, the more of it that's if you're going downhill with a river, it's going to flow faster. To me, that's what's going to happen with your value. If you're making like kind of $10,000 a month, as opposed to £50 a month. Yeah. Or £200 a month, there's a big difference there. The difference is the rate of the value flow, how much you can make a return on that value. if you want to make more of that happen, you've got to you've got to leverage it. Yep. And that's another aspect in business that we want to be looking at. And again, emotional intelligence fits right bang into that, to help people value what they've got and then find a way of leveraging it.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I love that concept of self-investment first.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of things that hold people back from the entrepreneurial route is first the self-doubt, the imposter syndrome, and just believing that, I mean, let's be real, there's not really many original ideas anymore. Our agency does operate on kind of like a unique philosophy, but by no means is what we're doing reinventing the wheel. It's not. It's just doing things in a particular way. So if you can get yourself past that barrier of really being afraid to step out and do what you think you need to do or want to do, and then don't doubt yourself when things actually start to happen, because there's some days, and especially just sat here right now, 10 months ago I was in my bedroom, just set up my Fiverr account while working at another marketing agency, hating my life because my room was really small and I have basically worked and slept in the same room, and it drove me nuts. Whereas now I'm like, how the hell did I get here? But then I have to realise that I got here through Buster Mass the whole time, everyone else can, and it sounds, especially when you haven't done that first thing. So for me it was that first client opened the door. When you haven't opened your first door, this all seems impossible, fluffy talk. Whereas if you can get to the point where you're there, you're on the cusp of opening that first door. Once you do, you'll realise how possible it is. And if you've got one client, you can do it again. If you sell one product on Shopify, you can do it again. And that really opens up. But just battling for that first phase of imposter syndrome and self-doubt can completely change your life, whether it's entrepreneurial or not.
And that must have come through facing up to these emotional intelligence issues within. So many entrepreneurs suffer from imposter syndrome. Am I
every day
it?
You wake up and you think, who's going to bust down the door? And there he is. There's the fake. You know, wait, no, and they take you away. But that's not the case.
And so what that requires is some skills. So, for example, let's look at mindfulness for a moment. One of the great things about mindfulness is that it helps you to be aware of yourself, your body, and all these other things. But it also helps you to be aware of how much in your head you are. And I see a continuum of thinking negatively. One is we usually are thinking about things in the past.
Yep.
And that's usually around regret and guilt issues. At the other end of the spectrum, we're thinking in the future. Our thoughts are in the future. What might happen? And that leads to fear and anxiety and worry. And if you're mindful suddenly that you've got this thought process of negative emotions, thought process, you can be sure that there's going to be negative emotions that fit with that. And a skill of mindfulness will just be able to help handle that and bring an awareness to what your body is doing, what you need to do now. And maybe you've got a coach who you can talk to about that kind of a dynamic and help you to develop the habit that you're talking about that's got you from your bedroom to here.
And there's part of it is luck. Obviously in business there is always a little bit of luck, like getting that first one. Someone has to discover you by chance. But one of the things that really helped me was my mum's a fully qualified counsellor, and what she told me is she gave me a sheet of paper and it's just a bunch of kind of mind bubbles and text bubbles, and says, anytime you have a negative thought or negative thought process, I need you to write it in that bubble and then mind map underneath it and take a moment, take a breath, and I want you to logically justify why you talked about yourself in that way. And then
there you go.
99.9% of the time you cannot justify a reason as to why you are talking to yourself like that, because if you judge the way you talk to yourself about how you would talk to someone else, you need to start thinking in that capacity. So I would never say anything like I do to myself like I would to you. It'd be impossible. And I realise how much you talk down to yourself, even if you do feel like a pretty confident person, because even pretty confident people when something does go wrong, which doesn't happen often because they feel like they're in a flow state, it's so much more monumental. So yeah, that really helps as a technique. So anyone who is yet to kind of branch out into counselling or coaching or anything like that, start there. Get your Google Keep notes, get your pen pad out, even if it's journaling. That changed my thought process massively and brings that first step of mindfulness into play.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's hits two of the emotional competencies as I'm listening to you describe that story. One is self-knowing. So you're building up the ability of your ability to know yourself better and know what your trigger points are and know where your habitual steps are that you've got to change. And the other is self-control. Yeah, you're learning how to not lose it because of those thoughts. Yeah. So the skill of having self-control, that's just two of at least 10 I know about. So
yeah, and it's so nuanced that we may even need a part 2 to talk about all of this. So we've got to talk about it at some point. We'll have you on again. But right. I have no idea how long we've been chatting for, if I'm honest with you.
I have no idea anyway.
But I think we've done a fair bit, and it's been great to talk about everything. So I suppose we should wind down the show now. Ian, is there anything you want to talk about that you've got upcoming projects or anything else like that you want to talk to the people?
Well, I just want to finish with a quote. I will talk a bit about that, but many of you will know Stephen Covey from the past, and he's 7 Habits of Highly Successful, blah blah blah. He's written tons of great books. One of his quotes around this is, "Research shows convincingly that EQ is more important than IQ in almost every role, and many times more important in leadership role." This finding is accentuated as we move from the control philosophy of the industrial age to an empowered release philosophy of the knowledge worker age. And to me, that's the thrust of my going forwards for me. Yeah. I want to get involved in companies and I want to help people. I mean, I've been around this planet for quite a long time, as you can tell. Cover up the wrinkles and stuff.
Couldn't see anything.
But that I think there's many of us guys who are a bit longer in the tooth, who've got a tremendous amount of wisdom that need to capture not doing things the old way and getting stuck in old ways, but to see the opportunity of what I call being a live player. Yeah, that's something we can chat about another time. But this concept of reaching, I want to push into what I would call the liminal spaces. Yeah. They're right on the edge where we're not quite sure what's going to happen, but I know I want to be in this liminal space to push through and do what I've never done before. Absolutely. And that's, for me, what my direction's going in at the moment. I want to push and help push others to achieve things they've never achieved before in business, in creativity, etc., etc. Yeah.
And what more could you ask for? So, and I appreciate you coming down and sharing the wisdom, Ian. It's really, really great. And I think we'll definitely need a part 2 to dive in some other nuances on this. So, if you are interested, drop in the comments if you want to see a part 2 on this. We'll put out a ton of clips, and there'll be one of these every week or every other week, depending on if I have a cancellation. So, Ian, thank you for coming down. This was the Authenticity Hour. You'll be able to find us on Spotify, Google Podcasts, Facebook, Instagram, you name it, it will be there. So, thank you everyone for stopping by, and we'll see you on the next one.
Thanks, James.
Thank you.
Thank you.